35,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean. The jet dropped. Not gently, like a stone. Cabin lights flickered and died. Glasses shattered against mahogany tables. Passengers screamed. Inside the cockpit, the pilot collapsed. Alarms screamed. Warning lights flashed red across every instrument. The co-pilot grabbed the controls, fighting a violent storm swallowing the aircraft whole. The jet rolled sideways. Passengers thrown from seats. A billionaire watched his laptop smash against the wall. In that moment, it became clear. There might be no one left capable of flying. But somewhere in the back, a quiet passenger unbuckled his seatbelt. A man they'd mocked minutes earlier. A man they almost refused to let board. Be honest. If you were in that private terminal, surrounded by luxury and power and people who owned half the world, would you have noticed him? A man in a worn jacket, old boots, a small duffel bag, standing quietly while billionaires checked watches and investors laughed. Most people didn't. The receptionist didn't. The executives didn't. Victor Langford definitely didn't. They saw someone who didn't belong. Someone out of place. But here's what no one understood. Marcus Hill wasn't lost. He wasn't confused. He was watching. And what he saw would soon matter more than anyone realized. Rain hammered against massive glass windows. Luxury vehicles lined the entrance. Black SUVs. Silver sedans. A Rolls-Royce. Inside the waiting lounge, Victor Langford checked his watch. Victor wasn't just wealthy. He was the type of billionaire whose decisions reshaped industries. Technology, energy, banking. 3 continents depended on companies he owned. Tonight, he was flying to London to finalize the largest acquisition of his career. Around him stood investors, executives, a senator, people accustomed to control. The storm outside didn't worry them. Private aviation always found a way through bad weather. At least, that's what they believed. Then the terminal doors opened, and a man walked in who clearly didn't belong. Worn jacket, old boots, a duffel bag that had seen better decades. The receptionist looked confused. "Sir, this terminal is for private flights." The man nodded calmly. "I know." He placed a boarding pass on the counter. She scanned it, hesitated. His commercial flight was canceled. The airline transferred him here. Victor studied the man, turned to his assistant, put him in the last seat. Investors chuckled. One whispered loud enough to hear, "Looks like the cleaning staff is flying private tonight." The man didn't react, simply picked up his bag and walked toward the aircraft. But here's what no one noticed. As he walked past those investors, past the senator, past Victor Langford himself, his eyes moved. Quickly, quietly, professionally. He scanned the terminal layout, noted emergency exits, counted security personnel. He glanced at the storm outside, calculated wind speed, assessed visibility. He looked at the aircraft waiting on the tarmac. And for just a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Recognition. Because Marcus Hill had seen this aircraft before. Not as a passenger. As a test pilot. Years ago, before everything fell apart. Pay attention now. Because the man walking toward that jet carried something no one else could see. Not just a duffel bag. Not just old boots. He carried knowledge. Experience. The memory of standing in a cockpit just like this one, pushing aircraft to their limits while engineers watched. He also carried something else. The memory of what happened when he told the truth about a dangerous flaw. The memory of being ignored. Then silenced. Then destroyed. A career that ended because he tried to save lives. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was the storm. And the jet. And what was coming next. The aircraft waiting outside was stunning. A long white Gulfstream with gold trim. Engines humming quietly under the rain. Inside, the cabin looked like a luxury hotel. Cream leather seats. Mahogany tables. Soft lighting. Crystal glasses. Passengers settled in comfortably. Champagne poured. Victor opened his laptop. The quiet passenger moved silently toward the back, placed his bag under the seat, sat down without speaking. For a moment, he looked out the window at the dark sky. Then he closed his eyes. Outside, the storm intensified. One man prepared for what he knew would happen next. The engines hummed. Victor reviewed contracts. Investors laughed about old deals. The senator made one last call. And in the back, eyes still closed, Marcus Hill sat perfectly still. He felt every vibration as the jet began to move. Heard every change in engine pitch. Remembered every test flight, every near failure, every lesson learned the hard way. He didn't know exactly what would happen tonight, but he knew something was coming. The feeling in his gut, the memory of that flaw, the storm outside. And when it came, he would be ready. Because that's what you do when you've lost everything. You stay ready. The engines roared. Rain streaked past as the Gulf Stream accelerated down the runway. Faster, faster. Then lift. The wheels left the ground. The nose tilted upward. The storm grew darker below them. Inside the cabin, passengers barely noticed. Victor opened his laptop. Investors resumed conversation. Champagne poured again. But in the back row, Marcus kept his eyes closed. Not sleeping, listening, feeling. Every vibration, every shift, every change in engine pitch. He knew this aircraft. He had tested its limits. He knew what it felt like when something was wrong. And something already felt off. Here's what everyone else saw. A smooth flight. A beautiful jet. A storm they'd soon leave behind. Investors discussed market strategy. The senator made phone calls. Victor reviewed contracts worth billions. Flight attendants moved gracefully, offering drinks and warm towels. No one noticed the turbulence getting worse. No one noticed the wings flexing more than they should. No one noticed the autopilot making tiny corrections. Because no one was watching. Except one man. In the back row, eyes still closed, Marcus noted every change. And a quiet voice whispered, "It's starting. Watch closely now." Because while everyone else relaxed, Marcus watched something else. He watched the lights flicker. Not randomly. Patterned. He watched the wings through the small window, flexing just slightly beyond normal range. He watched the flight attendants' faces. Quick glances exchanged. They knew something was wrong. And then he felt it. A vibration through the floor. Wrong frequency. Wrong rhythm. His eyes opened slightly. He knew what that meant. Something in the control systems was failing. Not from the storm. From something else. Something he had warned about years ago. 30 minutes into the flight, the turbulence began. At first minor. A light shake. Passengers barely noticed. Victor glanced up annoyed, then returned to work. But inside the cockpit, Captain Reynolds frowned. Lightning flashed across clouds. Rain slammed against the aircraft. Radar filled with red. Then suddenly, the jet dropped. Hard. Gasps filled the cabin. A glass shattered. Victor looked up sharply. Can't they avoid storms? But turbulence intensified. The jet rolled sideways. Another violent drop. Now passengers were no longer relaxed. And in the back row, Marcus's hands gripped armrests. Not from fear. From focus. Inside the cockpit, the storm grew worse. Lightning exploded around them. Rain drowned out the engines. Captain Reynolds grabbed his chest, breathing sharp, pain across his face. Daniel, the co-pilot, turned. Captain? Reynolds collapsed. The crews grabbed controls. Captain. No response. Warning lights flashed across every instrument. The crews grabbed the radio. This is Langford Flight L7 requesting assistance. Another violent wave struck. The autopilot flickered. The aircraft rolled sharply. And crews realized something terrifying. He might not be able to control this alone. The flight attendant hurried toward the cockpit. When she returned, her face had turned pale. Victor stood. What's happening? She hesitated, then whispered. The pilot collapsed. For a moment, the cabin went silent. Then chaos erupted. What do you mean collapse? Is anyone flying the plane? The aircraft dropped again. Passengers screamed. A woman cried. Investors looked at each other helpless. Victor's hands gripped armrests. For the first time in his life, he felt something unfamiliar. Fear. Because in that moment his billions meant absolutely nothing. While panic spread through the cabin, one passenger remained calm. In the back row, Marcus slowly unbuckled his seatbelt. He stood up. The flight attendant spoke. "Sir, please sit down." He shook his head. "Open the cockpit door." Victor turned furious. "Sit down. You're not crew. You'll kill us all." Marcus looked at him calmly. Not angry, not defensive, just certain. Something in his eyes changed. "If you want this plane to land safely, open that door." The cabin fell silent. The flight attendant hesitated, then turned and walked toward the cockpit. Marcus followed. The cockpit door swung open. Alarms screamed. Warning lights flashed everywhere. The storm raged outside the windshield. Cruz struggled with the controls, sweat pouring down his face. Then he saw the stranger entering. "Who are you? You can't be in here." Marcus didn't answer. His eyes moved across the instrument panel. Quickly, professionally, reading everything. Altitude, airspeed, engine status. Then he spoke calmly. "Autopilot failure." Cruz froze. "How do you?" Marcus sat in the captain's seat. His hands moved across controls with practiced ease. "I've flown this aircraft before. Be honest. If you were in that cabin, watching a stranger walk into the cockpit during an emergency, what would you think?" Victor thought the same thing anyone would. "He's going to kill us." He started toward the cockpit. The flight attendant blocked him. "Sir, please. Get out of my way." But before he could move, the jet dropped again. Victor was thrown to the floor. And through the open cockpit door, he heard something unexpected. Calm, precise, commanding. A voice that knew exactly what it was doing. Back in the cockpit, Marcus gripped the controls. "Daniel, listen carefully. We're switching to manual." Marcus began disabling systems, adjusting power, balancing the aircraft. Outside, the storm raged violently. Lightning illuminated the clouds. Rain so loud it sounded like hail. The jet bucked and rolled. But Marcus's hands never wavered. "Reduce throttle on engine 2. Cruz complaid." Flaps to 15. Another adjustment. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the aircraft began to stabilize. Not completely, not safely, but enough. Enough to survive. Years earlier, Marcus Hill had been one of the most respected test pilots in the industry. Airlines trusted him. Engineers relied on him. He had helped test multiple aircraft systems, including this exact jet. He knew every circuit, every failsafe, every weakness. During testing, Marcus discovered something dangerous. A flaw in the autopilot software during extreme turbulence. A flaw that could cause complete system failure. When he reported it, the company ignored him. They didn't want to hear bad news about their aircraft. When he pushed harder, they turned against him. They claimed he was exaggerating. They said his findings were inconclusive. They suggested he was seeking attention. Then they destroyed his career. Marcus was blacklisted. No airline would hire him. No manufacturer would consult him. His name became unspoken. Within a year, he had lost everything. His job, his reputation, his savings, his home. He became invisible. The kind of man people like Victor Langford walked past without seeing. But one thing remained. His knowledge. And tonight, that knowledge would save every life on this aircraft. Back in the cockpit, Cruz stared at Marcus. You're Marcus Hill." Marcus didn't look up. Focus on the instruments. But Cruz couldn't look away. "I read about you. The autopilot flaw. They said you were wrong." Marcus interrupted. "They said a lot of things." Another wave of turbulence hit. Marcus corrected instantly. "Right now, none of that matters. What matters is keeping this plane in the air." Cruz nodded and got back to work. But the storm wasn't finished. Wind shear slammed the aircraft sideways. Marcus's hands moved constantly, correcting, compensating. "Power loss on engine 2. Cruz shouted. Marcus checked the instruments. "Feather it. We'll manage." But we'll manage. His voice didn't shake. Years of testing. Years of pushing aircraft to their limits. Years of knowing exactly how much a machine could take before breaking. He knew this jet could survive.
If he flew it right.
Outside, lightning exploded. Inside the cabin, passengers prayed. One man who had lost everything fought to save everyone. Stay with him now. Because the storm wasn't finished with them yet. Wind shear slammed the aircraft sideways, a brutal, unforgiving blow. Marcus's hands moved constantly, correcting, compensating, fighting. Power loss on engine 2.
Cruz chautit.
Marcus's eyes flicked to the instruments. Feather it. We'll manage. But we'll manage. His voice didn't shake. Years of testing. Years of pushing aircraft to their limits. He knew this jet could survive. If he flew it right. Outside, lightning exploded. Inside the cabin, passengers prayed. One man who had lost everything fought to save everyone. We need to divert. Cruz looked at him. Where? Marcus checked the navigation display. Dublin. The storm continued battering them. Lightning exploded. The jet bucked and rolled. But Marcus remained calm. Precise. Focused. Descend to 15,000. Cruz's hands trembled. We'll never make it through this. Marcus didn't look at him. We'll make it, not hope.
Certainty.
Years of knowing exactly how much a machine could take. Years of trusting his own skill. That certainty was the only thing keeping them alive. Inside the cabin, Victor had stopped trying to reach the cockpit. He sat gripping armrests, knuckles white. Through the window, only darkness and rain and lightning. Everything he owned. Everything he'd built.
None of it mattered now.
All that mattered was a stranger in the cockpit. A man he had mocked. A man he had dismissed. A man whose name he didn't even know. He closed his eyes. And for the first time in decades, Victor Langford prayed. Not to win a deal. Not for success. Just to live. A new alarm screamed. Cruz's face went pale. Engine 2 is overheating. Marcus checked the instruments. The temperature gauge climbed fast. If that engine failed completely, they might not have enough power to reach Dublin. Shut it down.
Cruz ter.
But we'll fly on one engine. I've done it before.
Cruz hesitatit.
Then reached for the controls. The engine spooled down. Silence from the right side. The aircraft felt wrong. Imbalanced. But still flying. Still fighting. Still alive. Minutes passed like hours. The storm began to thin. Through the clouds, a faint glow appeared.
Lights.
Runway lights.
Dublin.
Cruz almost cried. There. I see it. Marcus nodded. Gear down. Cruz lowered the landing gear. Flaps 30. Another adjustment. The aircraft descended toward the runway, fighting crosswinds, fighting the remains of the storm. But Marcus's hands never wavered. Years of training. Years of testing. All leading to this moment. This landing. The runway rushed toward them.
Faster.
Closer. Wind pushed the aircraft sideways. Marcus corrected. Another gust. He corrected again. The wheels slammed onto pavement.
Hard.
Rough. Aggressive.
But down.
The aircraft bounced once.
Twice.
Marcus fought for control. Reverse thrust. Brakes. Engine screamed. Then silence. Outside, emergency vehicles surrounded the jet, lights flashing. Inside, no one moved. No one spoke. Then someone started crying. Then cheers. Screams of relief. Because they were alive. Marcus sat in the cockpit, hands still on the controls, breathing slowly.
Cruz ter.
We made it. Marcus nodded. We made it. He walked toward the cabin. Passengers were crying, hugging, calling families. When they saw him, silence. One by one they stood. Victor approached slowly. I don't know your name. Marcus Hill. Victor extended his hand. I owe you my life. Marcus looked at the hand, then at Victor's face, then slowly took it. No words, just a handshake. Between two men forever changed. Emergency crews surrounded the jet. Red and blue lights flashed across the rain-soaked tarmac. Paramedics rushed inside, checking passengers, offering blankets. One by one, passengers stepped onto the runway. Some cried. Some laughed with relief. Victor stood apart, his suit ruined, his hair disheveled, his composure shattered. He looked for Marcus, found him standing quietly near the stairs, not accepting thanks, not celebrating, just standing, alone. Victor approached slowly, the man who had everything walking toward the man who had nothing, except the one thing that mattered most tonight. "You saved everyone," Victor said quietly. Marcus shrugged. "I did what needed to be done." Victor studied him. The worn jacket, the old boots, the face of a man who had seen too much. "Why didn't you tell anyone who you were?" Marcus looked back at the aircraft. Would it have mattered? Victor had no answer. Marcus continued softly. "Before takeoff, you didn't see me. None of you did. I was just the man in the old jacket, the one who didn't belong. Why would you have believed anything I said?" Victor knew. It was true. "Who are you?" Victor finally asked. Marcus was quiet. Then, "Marcus Hill. I used to test aircraft for a living." Victor's eyes widened. "I designed parts of the system that almost killed you tonight." Victor stared. "You knew about the flaw?" "I reported it years ago. They ignored me. Then they destroyed me." Victor's face shifted. "And you still saved us?" Marcus nodded. "Someone had to." For words. Simple. Powerful. They carried the weight of everything he had lost, and everything he still was. Look closely at this moment, because something shifted on that runway. A billionaire who could buy anything. A man who had lost everything. And, in that moment, they were equals. Connected by one thing. Survival. Victor spoke quietly. "I owe you my life." Marcus shook his head. "You owe me nothing. I owe you everything." Marcus looked at him. "Then next time you see someone who doesn't look like they belong, look closer." Not anger, just truth. The kind learned the hard way. That night, news stations around the world reported the story. A billionaire's jet nearly crashed during a violent storm. An unexpected passenger saved every life on board. Most headlines focused on the dramatic landing, the storm, the miracle. But the real story was deeper. The story of a man who had been invisible, who had been ignored, who had been destroyed by the industry he helped build, and who, when everything went wrong, was the only one who knew what to do. That wasn't luck. That was integrity. 3 days later, a thick envelope arrived at Marcus's small apartment. Heavy paper.
Cold sal.
Inside, a letter from Victor Langford. A position. Any position. Any salary. Any terms. Marcus read it twice. Then set it down. Thought about the industry that destroyed him. The men who ignored his warnings. The years he spent invisible. He picked up a pen and wrote one word. No. Not bitterness. Not revenge. Just knowing that some things can't be bought. And he wouldn't sell what remained. This isn't a story about money. It's not about revenge. It's not about getting what you deserve. Marcus didn't save that plane for a reward. He saved it because it was the right thing to do. Because years ago, he watched people ignore warnings and almost die. Because he promised himself if he ever had the chance to make a difference, he would. Not for thanks. Not for payment. Because it mattered. Victor didn't understand at first. But eventually he would. Some things can't be bought. Respect. Dignity. Purpose. And the quiet satisfaction of knowing you did what was right. 6 months passed. Marcus still lived in the same small apartment. Same worn couch. Same simple table. Same quiet life. But something had changed. Not his circumstances. Him. He no longer felt invisible. Not because the world saw him differently. Because he saw himself differently. The news stories faded. The attention moved on. Victor's offer sat in a drawer unanswered. But every morning, Marcus woke up knowing he had made a difference. Not for money. Not for fame. Because it mattered. And that was enough. One evening, a knock on the door. Marcus opened it. A young woman stood there. Mid-20s. Tears in her eyes. "Are you Marcus Hill?" He nodded. She held out a photograph. A man in a pilot's uniform.
Smiling.
"My father.
He was on that flight."
The one you saved." Her voice cracked. "He made me promise to find you. He said you were the reason he got to see me graduate, walk me down the aisle, hold his granddaughter. She was crying. I'm here to say thank you. For my father. For my family. Marcus stood very still. After she left, Marcus sat alone, the photograph in his hands. He thought about that night. The storm. The chaos. The landing. He thought about the people on that plane. Their families. Their futures. He had saved more than 12 people. He had saved fathers, mothers, sons, daughters, Christmases, birthdays, graduations, weddings. A ripple of lives he would never meet. For the first time he understood. This was why he survived. Why he lost everything. Why he was on that plane. Not for revenge. For this. A stranger's daughter, crying with gratitude. This is why it matters. Not the headlines. Not the offers. Not the recognition. It's the quiet moments. The ones no camera captures. A daughter's tears. A family's gratitude. A life continued because someone showed up ready. Marcus didn't become rich. He didn't get his career back. He didn't return to the cockpit. But he gained something else. Something Victor Langford couldn't offer.
Peace.
The kind that comes from knowing you did what was right. Not for applause. Because it was right. That's a wealth money can't buy. A few weeks later, Marcus opened the drawer. Victor's letter still there. Any position. Any salary. Any terms. He could go back. Reclaim what he lost. Be somebody again. But would he be somebody? Or just playing a role? He thought about the test pilot he used to be. The man who told the truth and got destroyed. That man was gone. In his place stood someone else. Someone who didn't need the industry's approval. Someone who had found something better. Purpose. And purpose doesn't come with a salary. Marcus never took the job. He stayed in his small apartment. Lived his quiet life. But now, when he walked down the street, he wasn't invisible. Not because people recognized him. Because he no longer felt invisible to himself. He had saved lives. Changed futures. Mattered. Sometimes that's enough. You don't need a title. You don't need wealth. You don't need the world to know your name. You just need to know when it mattered most you showed up. That's a legacy no one can take from you. That's everything. 1 year later, Marcus sat in a small classroom. Not as a student. As a teacher. A community college. Evening class. 10 students. All ages. All backgrounds. He taught them aircraft systems. Emergency protocols. The things that matter when everything goes wrong. Most would never fly a jet. But they would learn something more important. To pay attention. To stay ready. To be the person who knows what to do when no one else does. Marcus looked at their faces. For the first time in years, he felt exactly where he belonged. After class, a young woman approached him.
Shy.
Nervous. Mr. Hill. Yes. I just wanted to thank you. I saw your story on the news. About the plane. She looked down. My little brother has a heart condition.
I was so scared all the time.
I didn't know what to do. Your story made me realize I don't have to be scared. I just have to be ready. She held up a CPR certification card. I got this last month. Marcus smiled. The first real smile in a long time. That's the best thank you I've ever received. A few weeks later, another envelope arrived. Not from Victor. From an aviation safety board. They had reviewed the incident. The autopilot flaw. Marcus's original report from years ago. They were issuing new regulations. Mandatory software updates across thousands of aircraft. And they wanted Marcus's help. Not as a test pilot. As a consultant. To make sure it never happened again. Marcus read the letter 3 times. Then he picked up the phone. For the first time in years, he said yes. Not for money. For meaning. This is what legacy looks like. Not money. Not fame. Not recognition. It's a young woman, no longer afraid, holding a CPR card. It's thousands of aircraft, safer, because one man refused to stay silent. It's a quiet classroom where a man who lost everything teaches others to be ready. It's a daughter, years from now, who will never know Marcus's name, but whose father will come home safely because of what he did. That's legacy. Not what you leave behind, what you pass forward. Ripples that keep going long after you're gone. Marcus still lives in his small apartment. Still wears simple clothes.
Still walks the same streets.
But now, when he walks, he sees them differently. The faces he passes. The lives he'll never know. Every one of them is someone's everything. And somewhere out there, because of one night, one storm, one choice, some of them are still here. Still living. Still loving. Still breathing. Because a quiet man in a worn jacket stayed ready. Because when everything went wrong, he showed up. And that's enough. That's everything. If this story touched your heart, hit that subscribe button right now. Not for me, for yourself. Because every time you subscribe, you're saying yes to more stories like this. Stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Stories about staying ready. Stories about what really matters. And leave a comment below. Tell me, is there someone in your life who taught you to stay ready? A parent? A teacher? A moment that changed everything? I read every single comment. Remember, you don't need a title to make a difference. You don't need wealth. You don't need the world to know your name. You just need to show up, ready, when it matters most. Subscribe now, and let's keep telling these stories together. See you in the next one.